Hey guys. Tonight we drift out into an ocean so wide it eats the edges of thought. You're lying on the woven deck of a Polynesian canoe, the air still thick with dawn, your breath sinking with the slow heartbeat of the sea. The horizon looks empty, but it isn't. Beneath that shimmer of silver lies a world of signs, a pulse in the water, a slant in the light, a promise of direction written in movement itself. You probably won't survive this trip, not because it's perilous, but because somewhere between the salt and the silence, the version of you that thinks of maps as paper might quietly drown. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rise to your feet, balance uncertain, the deck creaking under you like an old chest lid. Around you, the ocean glows with the early light, each ripple catching the sun in tiny fragments. The navigator standing nearby, the tautai, or wayfinder, doesn't look down at any compass. He simply narrows his eyes toward the horizon, as if reading a secret text stretched flat across the sea. You follow his gaze and realize that the water isn't uniform. It bends and breathes. The swell under your canoe has a direction, a rhythm, almost a handwriting. For the people who once crossed thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean in canoes barely the width of your car, the sea itself was the map. No parchment, no magnetic north, only the feel of waves striking the hull, the sound of water against wood, the taste of salt carried from distant islands. Each island leaves a different signature on the sea, a blend of swells, currents, and wind patterns. The experienced navigator could sense that signature long before land appeared. You close your eyes, trying to feel it. There's a long swell from the southeast, steady and deep, the background rhythm of the trade winds. Then, overlaying it, a faint cross swell, a gentler pulse from the north. The navigator names them, Telapa, Ka'alahua, patterns invisible to the untrained eye. To you, it's just motion. To him, it's a paragraph of direction. Historians still argue whether early voyagers relied more on these wave patterns or on celestial navigation, but everyone agrees that the mastery of ocean swells was no less than a language. A historical fact slips in here. The Polynesians reached islands across an area covering more than 10 million square miles, larger than Europe, Asia, and Africa combined. Long before Columbus ever misplaced the Bahamas for India, they were moving intentionally between far-flung islands, guided by knowledge passed mouth to mouth, star to star. Their maps weren't drawn. They were memorized through chants and gestures. One of those chants, still whispered in parts of Micronesia, describes swells as living beings. Quote, "The mother swell rocks the child current, and together they cradled the canoe." A little quirky? Sure. But think about it. If you lived your life on water, you'd start giving it family names too. The sea would stop being it and start being her, or them, or that cousin who sometimes flips your boat. You kneel at the bow, hand trailing in the foam. The navigator grins and points toward a faint discoloration in the water, a shift from blue-black to milky turquoise. He says, "See that? A shallow ridge below." You realize he's right. The ocean here smells slightly different, tangier, full of stirred sand. Without sonar or satellites, he's reading the color of depth. Polynesian navigators cataloged over 30 distinct shades of ocean blue, each hinting at a certain depth, type of seabed, or even proximity to land. And yet they never wrote this down. To learn was to sail, to feel, to fail, and to try again. One wrong read could mean hundreds of miles off course, which out here meant goodbye. But there's an odd detail you wouldn't expect. Some wayfinders claimed they could hear islands. On still nights, when air and sea flattened, they said the ocean carried a faint echo of surf breaking on distant reefs. Modern scientists scoff, then whisper that maybe, just maybe, under certain acoustic conditions, low-frequency sound might travel farther than we assume. It's the kind of idea that sounds mystical until physics winks at you. You sit down, letting the canoe rock beneath you. The navigator dips his paddle once, twice, not to steer, but to feel. He explains that every island warps the rhythm of surrounding waves, creating interference patterns that can be felt, like overlapping ripples in a pond when you drop two stones. The ocean becomes a tactile chart. The canoe becomes your fingertip tracing it. He gestures at the sky, though it's still daylight. He says, "Later, the stars will confirm what the waves already tell you." You nod, but your mind lingers on the idea that knowledge here isn't visual alone. It's full body. You don't read the sea. You listen to it with your skin. A small flying fish leaps beside you, catching sunlight before vanishing again. The navigator chuckles. He's late to his meeting. It's your first joke at sea, and it feels strangely right. Humor out here is how you keep the fear at bay. The vastness is too big to face without a smirk. As the day stretches, the canoe cuts across invisible highways of current. You learn that these highways shift with seasons, winds, and El Niño cycles. Some navigators could predict weather by the taste of humidity or the smell of rain 100 miles away. Skeptical? Try living generations on boats. You'd learn too. At sunset, the ocean's texture changes. The long swells slow, flattening into something almost expectant. The navigator nods approvingly. He says, "We're in the lee of land now," though no island is visible. Somewhere beyond that golden haze lies your first destination, drawn not by lines on paper, but by pulse and pattern, color and calm. You finally understand that maps are conveniences for those on land. Out here, they're unnecessary clutter. The world itself is already annotated, if you learn to read it. The night cools, and the sea sighs around you like a giant turning in its sleep. The navigator hums softly, a chant that rises and falls with the waves, syncing his mind with their rhythm. You let your own breath match his melody, and for a fleeting moment, the boundary between you and the ocean disappears. You're no longer traveling through the sea. You're part of it, part of a lineage that measured distance not in miles, but in heartbeats and trust. And as stars begin to flicker into view above the fading horizon, the next lesson awaits, glittering in the dark, like memory itself.
Night folds over the canoe like velvet, thick and warm, and for the first time, the ocean feels truly endless. The air smells faintly of salt and breadfruit ash from the fire you left behind, far beyond the horizon. The navigator sits cross-legged at the stern, eyes fixed on the sky as if it were an old story he's memorized. You tilt your head back too, and suddenly the stars don't look random anymore. They look organized, deliberate, like someone spilled diamonds but then rearranged them out of guilt. The Milky Way arches above you, a river of light. The navigator calls it Te Ikaroa, the long fish. In his world, That band of glitter isn't just scenery, it's a coordinate system. He traces his finger upward. That, he says softly, is your road tonight. You squint, but there are too many stars. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Your city-trained eyes can't even tell which ones matter. He smiles as if reading your thoughts. He says, you don't need them all. You just need the ones that stay true. The Polynesian sky was divided into star houses, imaginary rising and setting points along the horizon. Each star had its time to appear, its time to vanish, and the navigator memorized them like verses in a hymn. As a star rose, you steered toward it. When it set, you shifted your heading toward the next. Simple in theory, brutal in practice, because the sea doesn't hold still while you're busy admiring Orion's belt. Historians still argue whether navigators used fixed star compasses or relied on rhythmic memory, chanted sequences of celestial bodies tied to songs of paddling or breath. Either way, the system worked. When Western explorers like Cook and Magellan were bumbling through the Pacific with sextants and celestial tables, Polynesian navigators had already crisscrossed it for centuries, using only their eyes, their minds, and the sky. You watch the navigator raise his arm, hand flat, aligning stars along his knuckles. Your horizon line, he murmurs, is your ruler. He shows you how the distance between two bright points can mark degrees of latitude in a way no modern app could simplify. His eyes flick to the left. That's Hokulea, he says, the star of gladness, what you might call Arcturus. She points to Hawaii. It's a lovely moment of orientation until you realize he's using her pronouns. Stars, in this worldview, are relatives, companions, not coordinates. They have moods, personalities, even moral expectations. One navigator might refuse to sail if a certain star rose at the wrong angle, seeing it as a warning. You imagine trying to explain that to a travel insurance agent. Still, the relationship between human and cosmos here feels strangely personal. The navigator isn't just looking at the sky, he's in conversation with it. When a faint wisp of cloud crosses Hokulea, he pauses mid-sentence, as though listening. Then he nods, adjusts the sail slightly, and continues humming. You ask what he saw. He shrugs. She winked. You grin. That's your data input? He laughs, the kind of low, quiet laugh that makes you feel small but safe. You call it data. I call it noticing. It's not mystical, you realize. It's training. Generations of people memorized the sky until it became muscle memory. Each star's rise and set matched a point on the horizon known as a kinda, a home. By linking celestial motion to geography, navigators could hold a mental atlas that rotated with them as they moved. It's like running Google Maps entirely inside your brain, but the battery never dies. There's a fringe detail scholars whisper about. Some navigators reportedly used the faint color shift of starlight near the horizon to gauge humidity and weather changes. That's borderline superhero stuff, except astronomers now admit that atmospheric refraction can slightly tint stars redder or bluer depending on conditions. Maybe ancient navigators didn't just imagine it, maybe they actually read micro-changes in the color spectrum with naked eyes trained over decades. As the hours drift by, the sea smooths out to glass. The canoe barely whispers across it. The navigator leans forward and murmurs another name, Te Piringa o Te Tai, the gathering of the seas. You realize he's not just talking about water now. He's talking about alignment, the meeting of wave, wind, and starlight into a single readable language. For every new constellation, he has a story. The Southern Cross is a stingray's tail. Orion's belt becomes 3 fishhooks. The stories aren't quaint. They're mnemonic devices. You realize that mythology here isn't superstition, it's an efficient hard drive. Each myth encodes a pattern, a direction, a season, a warning. Forget the story, and you forget how to go home. You lean back, letting the wind brush your face, and try to memorize the same shapes. You fail instantly. Your brain, soaked in modern convenience, rebels at this kind of labor. So you cheat. You make your own constellation, naming 3 bright stars after your favorite snacks. The navigator glances at your pointing finger and chuckles. Those are fine companions, he says, but they won't bring you back if you get lost. He has a point. Out here, lost isn't an existential metaphor. It's a very real condition with no Wi-Fi. At midnight, he stands and stretches, the stars wheeling behind him. Every night, he explains, the sky moves slightly earlier. If you know which star belongs to which month, you know your season. In other words, timekeeping is navigation too. The whole system breathes, space and time intertwined, as stars as calendar and compass in one. It's humbling. You remember that old school assignment where you had to find the North Star. That single task took you 20 minutes and a Google search. These people memorized hundreds, and they passed it down orally, generation after generation, without a single note scribbled anywhere. There's a historical footnote you can't shake. In 1976, when the double-hulled canoe Hokulea sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional navigation, safely after 34 days guided purely by stars, wind, and wave feel, the skeptics went quiet. The ocean, it seemed, still recognized its old readers. The night deepens, and the line between stars and water blurs. The sea mirrors the sky perfectly, a twin universe shimmering beneath you. The navigator leans over and whispers, "Now you see why we call it the Sky Road. Above and below, it's the same path." You test it. You look down, and sure enough, the reflection of the stars shivers across the dark surface, making it impossible to tell which way is truly up. It's dizzying, hypnotic. You understand how, in the old days, wayfinders would enter trance-like focus during night travel. Half meditation, half mathematics. A light joke flickers through your mind. So basically, they invented Zen and GPS in the same canoe. The navigator pretends not to hear, but the corner of his mouth twitches. Sometime before dawn, the eastern horizon begins to pale. Stars fade like forgotten dreams. The long fish thins into mist. The navigator lowers his hand. "Now we trust what we've learned," he murmurs. The stars sleep. The ocean speaks again. You lie back, eyelids heavy, the last of the constellations sliding behind morning's edge. Somewhere between wakefulness and dream, you feel the canoe tilt slightly. The navigator adjusts the sail without looking. He doesn't need to. Every gust, every sparkle, every ripple is a sentence he can read. And as sunlight returns, painting the sea gold, you realize something unsettling. This isn't navigation, it's literacy, an ability to read a language most of the world forgot. You blink against the brightening sky, where only one last star clings to visibility, trembling above the horizon like a punctuation mark at the end of a long, elegant sentence. The navigator smiles faintly. She says, "We're on course."
The morning swells roll in slow and deliberate, like the ocean is stretching after a long night's watch. You blink salt from your eyelashes and feel the rhythm underneath the canoe, a deep, rolling heartbeat that's older than memory itself. The stars are gone now, hidden behind daylight, but the navigator hasn't lost his map. He's just shifted languages. Last night the sky spoke, now the sea whispers. He crouches low, one palm pressed against the hull, eyes closed. The canoe rocks slightly, as though breathing with him. Then he points off to starboard. "You feel that?" he asks. You don't, at least not yet. The surface looks calm, the same soft quilt of blue stretching forever. But the navigator grins, patient as a teacher with a slow student. "There's another swell underneath," he says, "crossing this one. It's not wind, it's land." You raise an eyebrow. Land? From a wave? He nods. Every island sends its voice through the water. It sounds poetic, and maybe a little unhinged, but he means it literally. When waves strike an island or reef, they reflect back subtle counterwaves, long, low undulations that mingle with the regular ocean swell. To an untrained sailor, they're imperceptible. To a wayfinder, they're as clear as road signs. The sea isn't chaotic at all. It's layered, patterned, humming with meaning. You lie down and press your palm to the wooden deck, mimicking him. The vibrations are faint, so faint you think you might be imagining them. But then the navigator adjusts your hand slightly. There, a second pulse, softer, slower, coming from a slightly different direction. "That's the island's echo," he says quietly. "Still many days away." A mainstream historical fact slides in here. In the Marshall Islands, navigators once built rebelebreb, stick charts made from curved coconut fibers representing wave refraction patterns. The sticks crossed where swells met, forming a tactile diagram of invisible geography. Outsiders dismissed them as symbolic art until modern oceanographers confirmed their accuracy. You imagine those ancient sailors tracing fingers along the sticks in the dark, memorizing the field before setting out. Now, out here, you're living that chart in motion. The navigator explains that different swells have personalities. The dominant one, driven by the trade winds, comes from the east. It's broad-shouldered, dependable. Another, gentler swell slides up from the south, generated by storms in faraway latitudes. And somewhere beneath it all, a faint third rhythm, too subtle for your landlocked brain, reveals a distant island's presence. He calls this one Ka Lehua, the flower wave, beautiful, fleeting, easy to lose if you don't listen. It's humbling. You spent years trusting machines, GPS, compasses, maps printed on glossy paper, and here, a man can tell you your coordinates from the way his canoe breathes. You ask if this method ever fails. He shrugs. Sometimes the sea is quiet. Sometimes she lies. Historians still argue whether these wave readings were truly reliable over long distances or just romanticized folklore. But the record of successful voyages suggests otherwise. When explorers in the 20th century challenged modern Polynesian wayfinders to navigate without instruments, they reached their targets with stunning precision. Science, at last, caught up to intuition. A quirky bit of lore drifts in. Some old navigators claim to see waves at night through phosphorescence, the faint glow of plankton stirred by motion. By watching the streaks of light curve under starlight, they said they could trace overlapping wave paths. Whether that's scientifically provable or not, you can imagine it. The ocean lit faintly from within, a living chart glowing blue beneath your canoe. It's half myth, half science, entirely mesmerizing. The navigator shifts his weight, eyes fixed on the horizon. He murmurs, "Waves are like gossip. They tell you what happened far away." You laugh softly. "So the sea is basically the world's nosiest neighbor?" He chuckles. "She's also the most honest. She repeats what she hears exactly." The canoe glides forward, its movement guided by rhythm more than steering. Every few minutes, the navigator tests the angle of the main swell with his knees. You notice he never looks down at the water. He feels it through his body. The canoe becomes an extension of his senses, like a stethoscope pressed to the chest of the ocean. By midday, the sky is clear and pitiless. Heat shimmers. The horizon trembles in the haze. You start to lose your sense of direction entirely. Everything looks the same. Blue above, blue below, and no comforting line between them. It's disorienting, and maybe that's the point. To read this world, you have to surrender to it first. You remember a modern debate. Some researchers argue that navigators use not just waves, but also long-distance swell interference, a kind of standing wave pattern detectable by body sensation rather than sight. Others think it's impossible, that humans aren't that sensitive. Yet as your body rocks with the canoe, you start to feel something. A faint, rhythmic tug deep in your core, like the ocean is breathing through you. Maybe it's imagination. Maybe it's resonance. Either way, it's oddly soothing. The navigator interrupts your thoughts. "You feel that crossbeat?" he asks. "The one that comes from your left side?" You nod. "That's our island calling back. If it fades by sunset, we're drifting off course." It's absurdly simple, and profoundly complicated all at once. You watch as he adjusts the sail, barely a hand's width. The canoe's motion shifts, harmonizing the competing swells into a smoother rhythm, balanced, restored. He tells you that apprentices would spend years learning to detect these subtle cues, first by sight, then by touch, then by instinct. You must learn with your bones. If your mind tries too hard, you'll miss it. You can't help but laugh. "So don't think too much. Got it. I've been preparing for that my whole life." He grins. "Good. You'll make a navigator yet." The afternoon drifts by in a hypnotic blur of light and rhythm. You find yourself counting the waves, losing track, then counting again. There's something meditative about it, like the ocean is teaching you to slow down, to notice smaller things. The slap of water against the hull becomes punctuation in an endless conversation. A distant patch of sea shimmers differently, smoother, brighter. The navigator squints. "See that?" he says. "That's a wind shadow. There's an atoll under that." You stare harder, but to you it's just water on water. Still, you take his word for it. Hours later, when the faint outline of land finally ghosts into sight, exactly where he said it would, you nearly forget to breathe. He just smiles. Not smug, but serene. He says, "The ocean never hides her truth, only her timing." As the sun begins to sink, the waves lengthen, the swells deepening into long rhythmic motions that cradle the canoe like a cradle. You feel small, but connected, suspended between sky and sea, surrounded by movement, yet utterly still inside. Somewhere, deep below, a whale calls, a long, mournful note that ripples up through the hull. He closes his eyes and listens. "Even he knows where he's going," he whispers. You don't ask how he knows that. Some things you just accept. By the time night threatens again, you've stopped trying to read the sea. You've started to listen instead. Each crest and trough feels like breath. Each shift of water against the hull feels like punctuation in a story too vast for paper. When the navigator finally says, "Now the sky will speak again," you almost don't want it to. The waves have begun to make sense, if not logically, then spiritually. But he grins, sensing your thought. "Don't worry," he says. "The sea and the sky tell the same story. They just use different voices." And as twilight gathers, painting silver paths across the water, you realize who's right. The ocean is still talking. You've just learned the first few words.
Morning drifts in quiet and pale. The sea turns smooth as silk. The air hums faintly, thick with moisture, and the world feels balanced on the edge of something, like a held breath. You think you're beginning to understand this rhythm now. Night for stars, day for waves, dawn for silence. But the navigator isn't looking at the sea or sky today. He's watching the horizon with the same intent stare a cat gives a suspicious curtain. You follow his gaze and see clouds. Just clouds. Fluffy, innocent, nothing to write home about. He tilts his chin toward them.
There, he says softly, land breathes there. You blink. Land? From clouds? He grins, as though you've just asked whether the sun rises in the morning. Yes, he says, because land warms differently than sea. The air over it climbs higher, builds those. He gestures again. Flat bottom, tall top, those are your clues. You look closer. It's true. One patch of cumulus has a flatter base, its top spreading upward like a soft mountain. You never noticed clouds could reveal geography. He adds, if you watch long enough, you'll see birds come from that direction too. They're the sky's messengers. The first pair of terns appear as if on cue, small white flecks darting low across the waves. They're flying straight, no aimless circling. The navigator nods approvingly. They feed at sea, but they sleep on land. Follow them when they leave at dusk, and you'll find your wrist. A mainstream historical fact fits perfectly here. Early Polynesian wayfinders often relied on bird flight patterns to locate islands beyond visible range. The long-tailed tropic bird, the frigate bird, the noddy, all had habits so consistent that navigators could estimate how far land was based on how late in the day the birds turned home. A frigate bird flying low in the morning might mean land was 2 days away. If it was flying high at sunset, the island was near enough to smell. You start to notice how the sea around you changes too. Tiny fragments of floating vegetation drift past, twigs, leaves, a half-eaten seed pod. Drifters from shore, the navigator says, plucking one up. They tell you which way the current carries memory. There's something poetic about that. The idea that every leaf, every feather is a note sent by the land to those who listen. You can't resist a smirk. So basically, the ocean's a big mailbox. He grins, and every wave is the postman. The canoe glides on. The sun climbs higher, bleaching the horizon to pure glare. You squint until your eyes water. That's when you notice another detail. A faint greenish haze low above the sea where the clouds rise. Not reflection, not mist, something in between. The navigator whispers, "See the light bending? That's land reflection. The island paints the air before you can see it." It's a visual trick caused by heat and humidity, what modern science calls looming, an atmospheric mirage. To a trained navigator, that shimmer might appear up to 50 miles before land itself. You realize that Polynesian voyagers had built a sophisticated, wordless understanding of meteorology centuries before anyone in Europe started naming cloud types. He reaches into a woven satchel and pulls out a small, rough carving of a bird, worn smooth by years of fingers. For luck, he says, but also for memory. He explains that each carving in his canoe tells a part of the navigational lore. One might represent a specific bird's flight direction during migration, another the color of water near a particular reef. When all else failed, he said, these small icons kept the songs alive. Historians still argue whether Polynesian navigation relied primarily on practical observation or was bound up with ritual and spirituality. But sitting here, watching a man trace invisible lines between sky and wave, you start to think the two were never separate. The sacred and the scientific were simply two names for the same act of noticing. The afternoon brings heavier clouds, thicker, darker, pulsing with hidden rain. The navigator squints, nods, and then smiles. The island is cooking, he says. She's making her own weather. You laugh. So clouds are like steam from a boiling pot? Exactly, he says. And the island never burns her food. It's small, funny, and true. These navigators spoke of land and sea as family, not phenomena. The ocean was a mother, the wind a trickster uncle, the island's patient siblings waiting to be found again. Maybe that's how you learn to cross an ocean without fear. You stop thinking of it as empty and start treating it as home. By late afternoon, the birds multiply. Tropic birds, petrels, even a frigate bird, its wings scissoring through the air with lazy grace. The navigator watches them with quiet delight. "They know before we do," he murmurs. "When they circle and rise, they're calling their island." You watch too. A few birds wheel upward, then dive, then head straight west. The navigator's smile deepens. Soon. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Early voyagers supposedly carried tamed birds, frigate birds or boobies, kept in woven cages. When the sea stretched too long, they'd release one. If it returned, there was no land. If it didn't, the wayfinder followed its direction. The first Polynesian GPS, complete with wings and attitude. You imagine Siri squawking impatiently every time you missed a turn. The horizon shifts again, barely perceptible at first, then undeniable. A darker line forms beneath the clouds. Land. Still faint, still far, but unmistakably there. You feel your heart lurch. The navigator only nods, calm as ever. The sea keeps her promises. For hours you watch that shadow grow, the clouds thickening above it like a crown. The air changes, more humid, carrying faint scents of soil and flowers you can't quite name. The ocean around the canoe flattens. The color lightens from indigo to jade. The navigator touches the water, tastes it, and smiles. "Fresh," he murmurs. "Streams meet the tide here." It hits you that this man, without instruments or maps, has read the entire planet around him, the stars, the waves, the clouds, the birds, even the taste of the sea. And you, armed with satellites and algorithms, can barely navigate a grocery store without Google Maps. He starts humming again, a low, rhythmic chant that sounds half prayer, half lullaby. The words blur with the motion of the canoe. You recognize a few, names of stars, of birds, of waves. Each verse records a direction. Each repetition locks it deeper in memory. You realize this is how they encoded everything, not written in ink, but in rhythm. Historians still argue whether such chants functioned as literal navigation tools or spiritual invocations. Maybe both. Maybe the repetition itself was what kept the navigator calm enough to sense the ocean clearly, to remain patient in the face of endless blue. As sunset bleeds across the sky, you can finally make out palm silhouettes on the horizon. You've crossed 100 miles of open ocean guided only by natural signs. The island glows faintly in the amber light, its reefs catching the waves like open arms. The navigator sighs contentedly. "Tomorrow we'll set foot again, but tonight we sleep between worlds." The canoe drifts gently, tethered between sea and shore, stars beginning to glimmer above the fading clouds. Birds settle on the water around you, their wings folded, their beaks tucked in. Even they rest now, their work done. You lean back, feeling the swell beneath you and the faint breeze of land ahead. The ocean murmurs, the navigator hums, and for a brief, perfect moment, you understand the deep secret of this art. You don't conquer the sea, you join its conversation. Night comes down slow and silver. The island's outline fades into shadow, its palm crests lit faintly by a crescent moon that rises as though it has been waiting for this exact moment. The navigator sits beside you, quiet, his paddle resting across his knees. You both listen to the hush of waves, to the birds settling in their hidden roosts, to the whisper of the sea slipping against the hull. You think the journey's over, but he shakes his head gently. "No," he murmurs. Finding land is only half of it. You must also learn how to return. You almost laugh, thinking he's teasing, but his eyes hold that same steady gleam they had on the open water. The ocean never stops talking, he continues. You can cross her once by luck, but to cross her twice, you must speak her language. So you listen again. The night breeze sighs, and you begin to pick apart its textures, the high hiss of air between the waves, the low thump of distant surf hitting reef, the occasional bark of some unknown island bird. Every sound becomes a syllable, every rhythm a clue. He explains that each island has its own signature voice. The swell patterns that wrap around its reefs form unique wave reflections, tiny invisible pathways that radiate far out to sea. These are called echo waves, and master navigators can feel them through the hull long before the island appears. It's like the ocean is constantly replaying an island's song beneath the surface. You think your journey's over, but he shakes his head gently. No, he murmurs, finding land is only half of it. You must also learn how to return. You almost laugh, thinking he's teasing, but his eyes hold that same steady gleam they had on the open water. The ocean never stops talking, he continues. You can cross her once by luck, but to cross her twice, you must speak her language. So you listen again. The night breeze sighs, and you begin to pick apart its textures, the high hiss of air between the waves, the low thump of distant surf hitting reef, the occasional bark of some unknown island bird. Every sound becomes a syllable, every rhythm a clue. He explains that each island has its own signature voice. The swell patterns that wrap around its reefs form unique wave reflections, tiny invisible pathways that radiate far out to sea. These are called echo waves, and master navigators can feel them through the hull long before the island appears. It's like the ocean is constantly replaying an island's song beneath the surface. You rest your hand on the canoe's edge and try to feel it. For a moment, nothing. Then maybe a faint double beat under the main rhythm of the swell, subtle as a pulse under skin. That's it, he whispers, the island speaking back. It dawns on you that even without sight or stars, he could leave this place and find it again by touch alone, not with tools, but with attention. And that, perhaps, is the quiet genius of Polynesian navigation. It isn't about memorizing data. It's about becoming porous enough to absorb a living system. He begins to hum again, low and even. You notice how the canoe seems to respond, rocking with the same rhythm. The chant isn't random. It matches the beat of the swells, aligning human breath with ocean motion. You realize this is more than poetry. It's calibration. The navigator is tuning himself to the sea. Centuries ago, before compasses and sextants reached the Pacific, voyagers carried such songs as their only maps. Each chant encoded a sequence of star bearings, ocean patterns, and island signs. Long oral algorithms of direction stored in melody and muscle memory. When a navigator sang, he wasn't performing, he was computing. You ask him if anyone still knows all these songs. He nods. Some, not many. He gazes toward the island, where faint fires flicker along the shore. When the missionaries came, they called our knowledge superstition. When the traders came, they called it luck. When the map makers came, they said they already knew where everything was. He shrugs. But the ocean, never forgot our names. You sit in silence for a while, the weight of that history pressing gently at the edges of your thoughts. You think of how entire civilizations once trusted memory, intuition, and cooperation instead of charts and machines, and how much of that vanished in only a few generations. But maybe not all. In the late 20th century, a revival began. Navigators from across Polynesia came together to relearn the old art. They built canoes again like their ancestors and sailed them thousands of miles across open ocean without instruments, guided only by the stars, the swells, and the whispers of birds. The hokulea, a double-hulled canoe built in Hawaii in 1975, became the proof that the ancient ways were not legend, but living science. You tell the navigator this story, how Hokulea sailed to Tahiti and back, and how the world watched in disbelief as her crew read the ocean the old way. He listens, smiling faintly, as if you've just described something he already knew would happen. The ocean remembers, he says simply. The moon climbs higher. The island's fires grow smaller as you drift farther from shore, tracing the rhythm of the return voyage. You realize he's testing you, asking whether you can still read the clues without him naming them. You try. You note how the wind shifts as night deepens, how the swell leans slightly against the hull from the east. You glance at the stars, the Southern Cross high above, its long axis pointing roughly south. Orion rising in the opposite corner of the sky. You whisper their names like fragments of an incantation. He nods approvingly. You see, the stars don't tell you where you are. They remind you how to think. That line lodges in your chest. It's the essence of it all, isn't it? Navigation as philosophy. To cross the Pacific was to remember the universe was a web, not a map. Each island, each current, each gust of wind was a thread connecting to every other. You were never truly lost because you were always part of the pattern. You look back once more toward the island, its lights now faint glimmers, and think of the countless generations who made such crossings with nothing but trust in that pattern. They moved not through empty space, but through story, through continuity, through belonging. The navigator breaks your reverie with a quiet laugh. You think too loud, he says. Let the sea think for you. You close your eyes. The canoe rocks gently, the stars wheeling overhead. In the darkness behind your eyelids, the world becomes rhythm again. The slow push and pull of waves, the pulse of wind, the heartbeat of the ocean itself. When you open your eyes, dawn is smearing the horizon in gold. The island is a faint shadow behind you now, and ahead the ocean stretches infinite once more. The navigator dips his paddle into the water, steady and sure. Now, he says, you begin to understand. You smile, not because you've mastered anything, but because you finally learned what mastery means. Not control, but communion. The ocean doesn't need to be conquered. It needs to be conversed with. Every wave, every gust, every bird overhead is part of a vocabulary older than language itself. And as the sun rises, painting the sea in molten light, you feel that conversation continuing, not between navigator and ocean, not even between human and nature, but between two halves of the same living world.